There we go. Alrighty. Good evening.
Good evening.
Tonight I want to talk about sin and redemption. Because I said I would, for one thing. And because I find this a good opportunity to connect the elements of Celtic prayer life with a bit of our own story here and now today. Esther, in the book that I'm going to read to you from today called The Celtic Way of Prayer, reminds us that Celtic prayer is elemental, is corporate, is heroic, and is imaginative. That Celtic prayer is elemental, corporate, heroic, and imaginative. It is elemental, as we know, because in the world of Celts, there is a connection, of course, to the moon, the stars, the earth, the sea, the rhythms of time, the rhythms of life, the rhythms of the seasons. It's fire, it's water, it's elemental, right? Just reminding us. It's corporate, and such is the gift that the monastic tradition that has influenced Celtic spirituality has given us. It's corporate in that we are in a prayer life that is relational by its very definition in the Celtic world. We're in relationship with one another, and in those ancient communal clans, and in the monastic experience, it is communal. And it is communal in the sense that we are always in communion with the God who is present with us. And the piece I most resonate with, connected to the saints throughout time. It is heroic. It is heroic, like the little pieces that we read last week in the legends of the saints, where the saint in those stories, it's a heroic thing that's happening in those stories, right? And it is imaginative. It is imaginative Celtic prayer. It is full of story. It is full of poetry. It is full of song. It is full of image. It is full of imagination. So Celtic prayer is elemental, corporate, heroic, and imaginative. As we make our way to talking about sin and redemption, it's important to know and to be reminded of this Celtic way of prayer and making the connection to those elements in our lives. So I'll remind you quickly that in the Celtic spirituality, there's always a journey. Always a journey. The peregrinatio that we spoke about, the peregrini, that there's always a journey. And the journey is not without purpose. This is important. The journey is not without purpose. The purpose of the journey is to grow closer to Jesus Christ. That's the purpose of the peregrini. The purpose, as you remember from our friend Calabanis, and I'm going to very much connect this to the talk about sin and redemption. Remember, our good friend Calabanis reminded us that we are on this journey so that we might discover our true resurrection. Our true resurrection. Or as Esther would say in Contemporary, to discover one's true self. The self that I might hope to be. The self that I might hope, that's a very carefully chosen word, to be. So it is for the love of God that we take this journey, and it is to discover our resurrection, discovering the true self, the self that I might hope to be. An important piece of the journey, of course, is that we never take it alone, that in the Celtic way we believe that Christ is already on the road with us, and that we can expect to encounter Christ all along the way. When we talk about this way of being, the Celtic way of being in prayer, it's much different than perhaps maybe what I was taught in Sunday school, where I had to go find my place to pray. Go find your place to pray, right? God bless you. Go find your place to pray. Where in the Celtic way of being, to be is prayer, right? To be is prayer. This is really important, particularly when we talk about sin and redemption. Okay? So, to be is prayer. You remember some of the prayer rituals that I read to you and some of the stories that I read to you where every action was a conversation with God or a ritualization of naming that God is present. So in the morning, waking up in the morning, for example, in the Celtic way, an ancient prayer. Bless me, O God, each thing mine eyes see today. Bless me, O God, each sound mine ears hear today. Bless me, O God, each odor that goes to my nostrils today. I like that one. Bless to me, O God, each taste that goes to my lips, each note that goes to my song, each ray that guides my way, each thing that I pursue, each lure that tempts my will, the zeal that seeks my living soul, the three that seek my heart, the zeal that seeks my living soul, the three that seek my heart. That's an ancient Celtic prayer to greet the day as you awaken. Or as a mother dresses her child in the morning. Even as I clothe my body with wool, cover thou my soul with the shadow of thy wing. And as the mother washes her children's face to wake them up in the morning, the palmful of the God of life, the palmful of the Christ of love, the palmful of the Spirit of peace, triune grace. You've all washed your children's faces that way, haven't you? Right? I was sharing with the morning group this morning how my mother used to come into the room. My brothers, three of us shared a room when I was growing up, and my mother would come in early in the morning, and she would wash our feet. One, because our feet were filthy. Two, because that was the only time we were standing still. And three, because she was a good mother. Right? So even in that ritual, I'm not sure she was praying this, but even in that ritual, there was a sense of being cared for. Right? Praise God. Yeah. Yes, sir. Mr.
The
TK.
first prayer that you read,
Yes.
at the end, there was something about this and then the three that walk by that. Can you go over that again?
I can. It's a nod to the Trinity. Yeah. The three that seek my heart, the zeal that seeks my living soul, the three that seek my heart.
I see, okay.
Yeah.
What page is that?
That is page 77 of the Celtic way of prayer. And at the end of the day, I make this bed in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. In the name of the night we were conceived. In the name of the night that we were born. In the name of the day that we were baptized. In the name of each night, each day, each angel that is in the heavens. How about that for a bedtime prayer? And of course we know in the Celtic way of prayer that, as the farmer was farming, as the shepherd was shepherding, there were prayers that were said that recognize that God is accompaniment. God is present on the journey to discover the self that we might hope to be. St. Patrick very much as part of the monastic tradition, very much conveys to us and gifts us with that prayer of believing that God and Christ are present and God is in protection of us. Right? There's an ancient story that goes with this. Do any of you know this story? The ancient legend that goes with St. Patrick that goes like this, that in St. Patrick's time in the 400s in Ireland, it was of the occasion to light fires. As the new night came, you would light your fire so that the fire would spread throughout the land and it would bring warmth and light. And you did that until the High King lit his fire. And when the High King lit his fire, and of course the High King was probably on high ground, when the High King lit his fire, then you were to dampen yours. But St. Patrick, because he was in the midst of the rituals of his community, did not dampen his fires. And the High King called Patrick and his companions to the high court so that they could have a conversation. And so the story goes that Patrick wrote a prayer of protection and accompaniment. And as the legend goes, as they were traveling, of course, the king set ambush for them. But the king's men who set ambush saw nothing on the road but deer and birds of the air. Right? Have you heard that legend? Yes. I know you have. So do you know what the song was? The prayer that they sang? Let me read some of it to you. See if it sounds familiar to you. For my shield this day a mighty power, the Holy Trinity, affirming threeness, confessing oneness, in making of all through love. From my shield this day I call Christ's power in his coming and in his baptizing, Christ's power in his dying, on the cross his arising. For my shield this day I call strong power of seraphim, with angels obeying and archangels attending, in the glorious company, in the holy and risen ones, in the prayers of our fathers. For my shield this day I call heaven's might, the moon's whiteness, the fire's glory. This day I call to, it goes on, wind's wildness, ocean's depth, earth's solidity, rock's immobility. This day I call to me God's strength, God's power, God's wisdom, God's vision. Anybody recognize any of this yet? Here you go. This is the giver aware. Be Christ this day my strong protector against poison and burning, against drowning and wounding, through reward wide and plenty. Christ beside me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ within me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ to the right of me, Christ to the left of me, Christ in my lying, in my sinning, in my rising, Christ in heart of all who know me, Christ on tongue of all who meet me, Christ in eye of all who see me, Christ in ear of all who hear me. And it goes on. But you know, right? You know now of what I speak. St. Patrick's breastplate, hymn number 370. Anybody want to sing it? I bind unto myself this day a strong a Trinity. That's all I know, so don't keep singing. Without looking at it. Without my verger next to me with a hymnal, I don't. That's all I know. Right? So, we get it in the Celtic way of prayer that Christ is everywhere. A companion on the journey as we discover our own resurrection, the true self, or the self that we would hope to be. So this is the bridge where I want to take you into a Celtic way of looking at sin and redemption. Right? So the great gift that the monastic tradition gave to the Celtic way and gives to us is stability. It's stability. That's the gift. Rick's been asking for me to address this in some way. It's stability. The great gift the monastic tradition gives is stability. It gives us a methodology. It gives us an invitation. It gives us a ritualization. It gives us song. It gives us poetry. It gives us reflection. It gives us companionship. It gives us elements. It gives us imagination as we take the journey, right? So it is with Christ before me, beneath me, beside me, around me, that we walk and live in a world that is sin, that is dark, and has darkness, right? There's, by no stretch of the imagination, did the Celtic way only live in that wonderful little part of creation that we hang on to. You know, the moon and the stars and the sea and the rhythms and the walking gently on the earth and talking to it, right? The ancient Celts certainly also understood that they lived in a world that was full of darkness and sin and offense and offenders, right? So there's an ancient story told in Welsh tradition that I am going to use as a way to invite you into looking at sin and redemption. And the story goes like this. See what sounds familiar in this story to you. The story goes like this, that in ancient Wales, there were 6 or 7 companions who were living in community, who went off on pilgrimage. And they found themselves landing on an island, and the island was emerald green and beautiful. It had water flowing, birds of the air singing, animals abounding. It was the perfect place. And they lived there for 8 years, living on the land, saying their prayers, living in community. And there were 3 doors located in a portion of this island. And they were told that they could walk anytime they would like through 2 of those doors. But 1 door they should never, ever open. Right? Does this sound familiar? Any of this sound familiar? Just a little bit? Hang in there. So for 8 years, these folks lived on this island until one day, finally, curiosity got the best of one of the inhabitants of the island. And he opened the door. The door that was forbidden to open. What happened when he opened the door were that he and the inhabitants suddenly became mindful, conscious of every loss they had ever sustained, of every relationship that they longed and missed, and of every ill that had come upon them and those that they loved. I once knew a girl named Eve. Right? Now, in Western theology, we have done some really unfortunate things with the creation story and with the story of the garden. But we know that one experience of that story, of course, is the forbidden fruit. And of course, we know that when that forbidden tree is discovered, that indeed Adam and Eve are cast out of the garden. Right? In a certain theology that I particularly don't completely agree with, one of the consequences for that action is that they are cast out of the garden, right? And this is the piece of theology that I don't particularly agree with, but it's out there. And that is the curse. That is the response to that action, right? Okay. So hear carefully now how the story in the Welsh legend turns. As the story goes, once that door is opened and the consciousness comes to these men now. The opening of the door becomes, in the storytelling, not a betrayal, but a blessing. But a blessing. It becomes a blessing, for it ends in them any escapist, hedonistic thought that they might have had. In other words, for 8 years, it was all about them. Right? For 8 years, it was all about them. Instead, the opening of the door and the raising of their consciousness brings them, forces them into the facing of the anguish of suffering. Suffering humanity. The broken pain of offenses and offenders. And it creates a recognition of the need for them to participate and seek grace in the suffering that they now are aware of. And the need for them to find help that comes from the bread. This is how the story ends. And for them to participate in finding help that comes from the bread, from the wine, and from the cross. From the bread, from the wine, and from the cross. This is the piece that I want to invite you into as we speak about sin and redemption. Is the opportunity to face in, eyes wide open, to the suffering, to the brokenness, to the sinfulness, right? And to find in that, remember our companion? Before us, behind us, to the right, to the left, above, beneath. Pretty good. Better than any Pope mobile, right? But to face in to that with the grace and the help of the wine, of the bread, and of the cross. The cross in Celtic world, we saw pictures of those Celtic crosses, and again we talked about the great Omega, which is symbolism for the world, and the arms of Christ stretching across, redeeming not just us, but of all of creation. It was very much a powerful symbol for the ancient Celtic world to see those crosses go up, and the rituals that developed around those crosses, because the belief in the ritual was that as they went to the cross, they were in Christ's very presence. Powerful symbol. Right? So we take Christ with us into the sin. Take Christ with us into the sin, and Christ joins us in the sin. In the Celtic worldview of sin, and it does exist, in the Celtic worldview of sin, the occasion to find Christ in the sin is the occasion to find the Christ who is one with us, who is empathic with us, who creates in us, as a response to our sin, tears of sorrow because we are broken. Because we are broken. This is a little bit different, perhaps, than how many of us bargained with God? How many of us, when we've offended or been offended or we're offended or we screwed up or whatever it is, how many of us have bargained with God, right? And how many of us have that little tape that is the gift the Puritans gave us? It's inescapable, folks. It's just part of being in this culture. There's a little piece of Puritan in all of us, right? Whether you want to admit it or not, right? That little piece of Puritan in us that says, oh, woe is me, miserable sinner, right? Yeah. In the Celtic worldview, the communion with Christ is one where we feel Christ's pain, Christ feels ours. And the road to redemption comes through sorrowful tears. Sorrowful tears. So that you'll hear in poetry, in Celtic poetry, you'll hear of prayers written to Mary, who is what? Broken-hearted at the foot of the cross, because there is her son. So you'll hear the prayers in the poetry of, and you'll hear even conversation. It'll take me too long to look those up. They're in the book. You'll hear even conversation in these prayers that folks would write between the sinner who would come sorrowful, speaking to Mary, who's looking up at the cross and speaking to Jesus. Conversation. Interesting. But the image of a deep feeling of sorrow where tears roll from the cheeks, is an image in the Celtic prayer life that leads us from sin to contrition and redemption. Not because we're miserable sinners, but because we're broken. Because we're broken. And we're open to the suffering that is ours and the world's. Here's a quote from one of them. Well, this is from Esther. True tears are those of real, deep personal sorrow, and they lead us in the midst of brokenness to a place of repentance. And only in this way, then, do we find a determination to change, which, of course, is what metanoia and conversion in the monastic tradition is all about. So I kind of want to, I want to use this, I want to incarnate this for you. Okay? And some of you have heard this story, so I'll try to tell it a little bit differently, but some of you have not heard this story, so you won't know the difference. Right? On my little pilgrimage, my peregrine, remembering, trying to find the true self that I hope to become, I'd like to believe that I'm a forgiving person. I'd like to believe that. I've spent a profession teaching about it. Forgiveness, right? Intellectually, I completely understand, even emotionally, I completely understand that forgiveness, as Jesus has taught us, is the secret to salvation, right? Forgiveness is the pathway to be free from those things that hold us hostage, in bondage. So I would like to believe that I'm a forgiving person. Some of you may or may not know, because you've heard this story, I spent a lifetime trying to work out my sinfulness in the relationship with my father. And I'm using sinfulness in the context of a broken relationship, full of hurts, full of offenses, you name it, it was all there. It was all there. But I spent a lifetime trying to figure that out. Even my lifetime as a priest, I tried a lifetime to figure that out. Not so successfully, I will say. My father died, as you know, a number of years ago, and before my father died, he set upon the work of doing genealogy. It was very important to him to do genealogy. So he was doing genealogy, particularly on his mother's side, which is the English side of our family. And he produced this document in a binder. Pages and pages of this document. Most of it, I assume, was pretty accurate, except for the part about my family, which he had completely messed up. And I mean now, I mean my family, my wife, my 2 children. Somehow he got that wrong. He had the birth dates wrong. It was just all wrong, which was a little icon into the relationship, I think. But I did not bring that to his attention, actually. But we'll just let this go. But one of the things my father discovered in doing the genealogy was that his grandfather, whose name, ironically enough, is Joseph Smith, go figure, His grandfather came to America in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and brought with him his children, this would be my grandmother and her brothers and sister. They set up shop in Mock Chunk, and he went back to England. And my father's doing this genealogy, and he would talk to us about this, and, just by the nature of our relationship, sometimes I paid attention, sometimes I didn't, But he discovered in doing his genealogy, he discovered where his grandfather was and where he was buried. And he set, before he died, we didn't know he was going to die, he didn't know he was going to die, he set upon the work of getting a tombstone placed on my great-grandfather's gravesite. This is very important to my father. He drove us all crazy for a year and a half, making all these arrangements and raising money, calling my brothers and I, can you contribute, da-da-da. I should have been tipped off that it was so important to him because it was the one and only time I have ever gotten a thank you note from my father. He wrote me a thank you note because I gave some money to this thing, right? So, long story shorter, he worked with over there, they got this tombstone, and even though the undertaker sent him pictures of this grave marker, my father went to his grave not really believing that happened. It's just the way he was. It's like, I have pictures, but okay. So when I was on my pilgrimage, it became important to me to go find this grave marker. Now, we all know how we work out our stuff, right? So I don't know. I mean, it's not like, Tony, you got to go do this. It was just like, I'm going to go do this, right? So, now remember, I'm 2 or 3 weeks immersed in the Celtic way. I have been talking to trees. I've been writing poetry. I have, I've been taking pictures of birds that I thought were hummingbirds, but were really following streams, and I am immersed in it, and I am certain that Christ is with me every step of the way, and it's all good. I make some phone calls. My sister, thank God, had the number to the funeral director. I made some phone calls, found out where the cemetery was, got the plot number. Some nice person said, I'll meet you there, and I got there, and it was a holiday, so nobody met me, which meant that I had a grave number, but I was standing in this immense cemetery, beautiful cemetery, walled, beautiful trees, and I set about looking for this grave of Joseph Smith. And I walked, and I just kind of realized, wow. So I sectioned it off, and it really, again, because I'm immersed in the Celtic way, I made it an opportunity for prayer. And so I'm walking and talking to God. We're walking, and then at some point it got a little funny, because I was like, wouldn't it be funny if I got all the way here and I couldn't find the damn thing? Wouldn't that be funny? And there was this little piece of me that was like an hour in. I was like, oh, well, screw this. I'm out of here. But no, I kept going, I kept walking, and I found it. And there it was, kind of right in the middle of the cemetery. If I just walked up the middle and looked to the left, it would have been there. But there it was. So what happened next, I never expected. Never expected. I stood there, I looked, I found it, and I immediately started crying. Just immediately started crying. And I introduced myself to my great-grandfather, and I began a conversation with my father. And it was, Dad, I found it. Here it is. I felt sorry for my great-grandfather because he seemed like he was buried alone there. There weren't many family names around there at all. No Smiths around. But I couldn't leave. I just stayed, and I couldn't leave. And then all of those little conversations that my dad had that I pretended I wasn't really listening to, it all kind of added up, in this economy of time. It all just kind of added up. So here's what my dad discovered about my great-grandfather when he was doing genealogy. My great-grandfather brought his family over, settled them here in Mock Chunk, Pennsylvania, went back to England. The reason he went back to England is because he had another family. It's a family gift, as you're about to hear. So he went back because he had another family in Smethwick, in Birmingham. He had another complete other family. And I can remember my father saying to me as he was doing this research, "Well, son, it seems like my grandfather was a little bit of a ladies' man." That's exactly how my father would say it. And I'm like, "Really, Dad? Okay." But here's what I realized, the punchline of the story is, as some of you know, my father had another family. My father, while he was still married to my mother, met another woman, formed a relationship, and started a family. So that one family was living on that side of Pennsylvania. I mean, at least my great-grandfather went across the ocean, right? On that side, and another on this side. And I didn't know that until I was 13 years old. And that was just the rite of passage. As you got to age, you got the truth, right? So clearly that led to a lot of disappointment in our lives and in my brother's lives, and my father left us. And so that was hard. That was very, very hard. But here's, in that moment of time, all right, now I'm before the grave, right? Christ is before me, beneath me, beside me. And I'm before that grave, and I'm talking to my great-grandfather, and it just dawned on me why it was so important for my father to make it right for my great-grandfather. Why it was so important for him to get a gravestone on my great-grandfather's. Because they knew each other. They understood each other. Right? They had something in common that the rest of us didn't have. And standing there that day with Jesus' hand on my shoulder, in conversation with my great-grandfather and my father, it all made sense. It all made sense. Not only did it make sense, but it brought the sinfulness of my relationship with my father to the front. And this is what I wrote. This is the part that you have heard it. I can't change this. This is what it is. On this particular day, I'm connected to my Father in a powerful way, finding my own connection with him in his imperfections and his vulnerabilities. I feel no pain or ill will, not even an ounce of resentment for his taking leave of us. But I'm finding a foothold of grace today to stand on, giving in to my own judgmentalism and giving thanks to stand on this ground of grace. It's as simple as this. My great-grandfather was an imperfect creature, and my father was as well. And guess what? I am too. Dad, I forgive you, and I pray that you will forgive me. So part of the Celtic way was to shed those tears in the midst of that brokenness and offer the sorrow that was, right? In that moment, I was able to see something that my hurt could never have seen. And that was, it could not have been easy for my great-grandfather. It could not have been easy for him in the midst of what he got himself into. Nor could it possibly have been easy for my father. And as the years went on, and you know that my father died suddenly. And so that last little piece about me forgiving my father, what I realized the most redemptive piece of that was I needed for my father to forgive me. Because I judged him, really judged him, right? And he tried. He did, he tried. In his weird Italian Ralph Cramden, Archie Bunker kind of way, he tried. But even to the end, you know, he died. I was pissed off at him when he died. He did something I didn't like that is trivial now in hindsight. Did something that I really didn't like, so I was pissed off at him. So our conversations were short. And the truth is, 2 weeks before he died, boy, I'm giving you it all tonight. This is not therapy, I promise. The truth is, about 2 weeks before he died, I was in the hospital because I had a little episode with my own heart. And so I was in the hospital. And my father called me, and this is the last conversation I had with him. And he said to me, "You're too young for that, son." And as was our relationship, I said, "I know I am, Dad, thanks." Right? So that was my last conversation with him. It was him trying to be pastoral to me, and me saying, onward and upward, man. Onward and upward, right? Okay. So I tell you that story to invite you into your own experience of brokenness, our own experience of finding Christ beside us, above us, beneath us, before us, behind us, to the left, to the right, and facing into our own tears of sorrow that lead to forgiveness, right? I was so free after that event, you know, and my relationship with my dad is different now, and I'm not saying it's all like, hey, I don't occasionally have flashbacks, especially when I'm with my older brother, who really does need therapy. But you get the idea, right? It's different, you know? And in the communion of the saints on that day, and with Jesus' hand on my shoulder, and in a conversation with my great-grandfather and my father, I found a little bit of hope for the true self as I would hope to be. Right? With that, I'm sending you into your small groups. And the questions are a little bit sharper this week than they have been in others. So be gentle with yourself and with one another. Before I send you into small groups, there is a prayer that comes from the 12th century that speaks to coming before Christ with tears of sorrow so that we can bring our need of redemption before him. And that is what we'll read in our prayer time together. I need to remind you before we go off that next week we do not have a session. That is a scheduled week off. I will be at a board meeting next week. And that our last two sessions are the 13th and 20th. And that the next time we gather, Hillary Raining will be with us. The Reverend Hillary Raining will be with us. Hillary is going to speak. Hillary has been to Bardsey and has experienced a kind of a ritualistic visit. And she's going to talk a bit about that visit and about the patterns of prayer life and the gifts that the monastic prayer life give to us. So she's going to talk about that. I've just mentioned this to you all so that you can think about this. I truly do hope to pull together some kind of pilgrimage to Wales. So here's what you need to think about. A, if you're interested in going, the three general times seem to be early August, late September, the spring. So just think about that if you're interested in that. I don't have any idea of details about the economy of that at this point, like how much it would cost. I just don't know that yet. And weather. Exactly. Why would we worry about weather if we got Jesus before us, beside us, in front of us, behind us? Yes.
Spring.
Yes, that would right. Wow, that's hard to imagine, but yes, correct.
This will be hard to pull off.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Any closing questions or comments?